This week on Theater Talk,
The 39 Steps.
What did you think of the stage version of it?
First of all, just terrific. And I thought it was very interesting because it is, first of all, it's not a parody. People should understand that.
Right.
It's an homage to, a much admired object.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation.
Ladies and gentlemen, with your kind attention and permission, I have the honor of presenting to you one of the most remarkable men in the world.
One of the hits of the season is a theatrical version of Alfred Hitchcock's 1935 vintage classic, The 39 Steps.
Clear out, Henry. They'll get you next.
It's been re-realized on stage at the Roundabout Theater.
Clear out, Henry. They will get you next.
And we wanted to talk about it with our colleague and friend, Professor Jerry Carlson, the professor of critical studies at the City University of New York and an expert filmmaker himself. Jerry, welcome to Theater Talk.
Thanks.
You have a show that I love, Cinema Tech on City University of New York.
CUNY TV, right. So now to The 39 Steps.
Yes, ma'am.
This is, you told me, one of your favorite films.
In fact, it's a film that I fell in love with when I saw it in high school. It's one of those movies I think that many people have fallen in love with, that you have the sense of everything works here. Somehow everything is right about it. This is one of the movies that defines what the movies are in some kind of way. And I actually, I've been teaching at universities for over 30 years, and it's actually the first film I ever taught. I chose it as an example for those very first class I ever taught at a university. This is what the movies can be.
What did you think of the Roundabout stage version of it?
I thought the Roundabout stage version was, first of all, just terrific. And I thought it was very interesting because it is, first of all, it's not a parody. People should understand that.
Right.
It's an homage to, a much admired object, but a much admired object that's over 75 years old now. And so it has all these period features to it. I mean, the UK, the London of the 21st century is not the Tweedy land of Hitchcock's 1935.
And you also have the music hall London, too. I mean, the music hall is sort of key to the movie and, of course, to the stage version, too. The big scenes take place in the music hall.
Well, absolutely on the mark, Michael, because one of the things that people think of when they think of Hitchcock is they always think, well, Hitchcock is the master filmmaker. Certainly, no question about it, a genius at it. But he was always somebody who was interested in what you might call this ongoing family dialogue between theater and film. And like all family dialogues, sometimes it's an argument and sometimes it's a discourse of love and appreciation. And in, I think the original film, if people have a chance to see it or review it, and by the way, I'd like to say that recently it was digitally restored, and so there's just this magnificent DVD of the 39 Steps that means you see it the way Hitchcock really filmed it, with that kind of clarity. But that it's a movie in which, as you said, it begins and ends in a music hall, but then the whole question of performance is threaded throughout the film. Richard Hannay, who is the uber Hitchcockian hero, you could say, because he's the poor innocent guy trapped between the police and the bad guys on the run. He had
The brilliant Robert Donnet, right?
Absolutely. Whom I think is both of you probably know, has this incredible presence on camera, and he's the everyman that becomes a hero. And in fact, as everyone recounts, he actually had very, very fragile health. Was a man who died very young from this. He had lung difficulties, and off camera, people were worried as to whether or not he could come on camera or not. And then on camera, he becomes every boy. He sparkles, and he's every boy's hero. Yeah, I'm going to be a guy like that when I grow up. It is one of those pieces in which, unless you have somebody who's charismatic in that role, because he's the thread of the whole thing. I have to give wonderful credit, I think, to this theatrical production, because it is sort of, at the same time, mocking, lovingly mocking of the notion of the British stiff upper lip, hero, and at the same time, you want to watch him. You don't reject him. In fact, you want to follow.
No, he's personable and handsome and
we should say for people who haven't seen the show that it's just a cast of 4, but the 4 people play all the different characters in the movie, and they do these fast switching around and all
practically
kind of
no sets, and yet they look at most of the shots. They have most of the shots in there and say, how can we make this? How can we show the magic of this moment with a minimal theater experience?
Well, I was thinking about that before we came on. And let's go back to the fact that this is actually all taken from a novel. But if I had to say what this was like the novel was a Botero sculpture of this huge character of some kind, but by the time we get to this, it's a Giacometti. It's this slender thing. It's this incredibly slender thing, because Hitchcock himself was this brilliant plastic surgeon while he was operating on the novel. Because the novel, first of all, it doesn't have the love interest in it, so they introduce no, it's all guys.
Really?
It's absolutely all guys.
So the classic scene with a guy handcuffed to the girl running around Scotland is not in the.
No, sir. No. Hitchcock saw in there the elements that could be, as it were, streamlined and shaped into this. What you have to say is a kind of classic Brew plot in which you have this striving but sympathetic average guy who turns into a hero and gets the girl, damn it, as well. But coming back, but in doing that, it's not that he overcomes all of these things by, James Bond daring do. It's because he's clever, and because he acts. Because, we have all the scenes in which he's having to pretend he's someone else. So, this is Hitchcock playing around with himself with this notion of what is acting. How do you become another person? How do you manipulate people by acting?
Interesting. Well, of course, the movie and the play begins with a man saying, I really had nothing to do that night, so I went to the theater, and there begins the adventure.
Well, and that's a very important point, I think, because one of the other things that Hitchcock did was that he really neutralizes the politics of the novel. The novel really is, it's written on the verge of World War I, and it's anti-German. I mean, it's all about the coming war and all of this. And Hitchcock knew how, again, with this masterful kind of surgery he could partake of saying, well, wait a minute, people, I'm not so sure people are interested in this topical issue, but there's some things here that will give me my through line in the story, but I'm not going to get messed up in politics in that kind of way. In fact, I'm going to make an entertainment, something that doesn't burden us with thinking about the topical features or warning us, because in a certain way the novel is a warning about the treachery of the Germans and the coming war. And I'm not really so concerned about Mr. Jordan.
Where was Hitchcock in his career when he made this movie?
Interesting question. He was well-known director. I mean, insofar as directors were known. Again, that's his whole thing. Directors had a different kind of status.
Hitchcock was kind of the first star director, right? When he eventually.
And knew that and knew how to build that kind of thing. He was a young man, not only of great artistry and skill, but of great curiosity. So he had been to Germany studying how the Germans were making films. He, like many people, was very interested in everything that was happening in world film culture in the 20s, which is just an extraordinarily creative period in film. And he's one of the guys who pulls it all together. And he pulls it all together in a film like The 39 Steps. Now, if we had a couple hours here, I could run you a bunch of clips from Soviet films and from German films and show you how he sort of puts it all together here This is a kind of encyclopedia of what you can do with certain kinds of film techniques up until 1935.
And all in about 85 minutes, right?
Oh, absolutely. No, and one of the reasons this film and the theater production, you know, which takes this from the film, are so palatable to us is because of its pacing. It's just this notion. It moves.
Absolutely,
you know, it's a train. The train leaves the station, and the train keeps moving.
So, and 39 Steps took him to Hollywood, right?
It's one of the films that took all of a sudden he became not just a gifted contract director, because remember, directors were thought of as contract professionals. It's work for hire, and you do a better or a lesser job, but it's really the studios or the producers who are this. And it began to emerge, and of course it emerged that he was somebody that was more than that. Now remember, if anybody would complain, and they shouldn't, but they would complain, well, why would you take Hitchcock and put him on the stage? You know, he was so cinematic. Hitchcock himself in his career was someone who kept crossing media, because he shocked his colleagues in the 1950s, because here he is a major film director by anybody's standards, and he starts dabbling in this vulgar thing called television. So why would a master like that, and why would he be interested in making little weekly things? But of course he knew that you're inspired by and enriched by contact with as many media as possible.
But he never back to the theater, though. He never, as a famous movie director, he never directed a play or a musical. No, he never did that. No. He was to my knowledge, from from what I've read, no, he was a film and he was a screen guy. Let's put it that way. The screen arts. I would imagine, if he could magically come back from the big studio in the sky, he would probably be figuring out a way to make the best thriller for your iPod right now. Right, exactly. All right. Jerry, thanks a lot for lending us your insights on Alfred Hitchcock and the 39 Steps, which is now on stage at the Roundabout Theater Company.
Got to come back, and meanwhile, we'll see you on Cinematheque on CUNY TV.
Thanks so much. What a pleasure chatting with both of you.
Yeah, pleasure.
What are the 39 steps? Come on, answer up! What are the 39 steps?
39 steps.
Florence Ziegfeld was certainly the greatest producer of his era and may in fact have been the greatest producer of all time. He is the subject of a fascinating, delightfully written book, Ziegfeld, The Man Who Invented Show Business, written by our good friend Ethan Mordden. Welcome back to Theater Talk after too long an absence.
Thank you.
You've been working on this book all these years.
That's where I was.
All right, the subtitle, The Man Who Invented Show Business. What do you mean? How did he invent show business?
When Ziegfeld started, his first Broadway show was 1896. The show business as it was nothing like what we now call show business. It was an entertainment industry. It was much smaller. It had two different races. There was the white time, as they called it, and the black time, for instance. Totally separate venues, separate people, separate audience. It was a completely different construction than what we know now. And when Ziegfeld finished with it, it was what we know now in a slightly more primitive form.
And what does that mean? Democratizing it?
Well, that, for one thing, he ethnicized it.
Yep.
He was the first producer, not one of the first, he was the first to racially integrate Broadway kind of thing. And it was so daring at the time that even though he had many imitators, no one else imitated that aspect. But it wasn't just a racial, white and black. He also ethnicized it. He brought in Jewish comics. He brought in Will Rogers. You don't think of him as ethnic, but he was 3/8 Cherokee. And
true.
It was a mixture of the styles and the attitudes of these different ethnic groups pushed together into the Follies that changed really the way the audience expects its entertainment to run in America. It became really the melting pot entertainment that we now know today, where everyone brings his own styles.
And the other thing too, when you just hear the word Ziegfeld, one thinks of big, lavish, spectacle entertainment with lots of girls. That's his invention as well?
To a certain extent. When he came along, there were spectacles and there were the modest shows. What he did was bring the spectacle aspect into the modest shows that he was at first producing. So that the ordinary shows that you expected to see, maybe a star or two, often not, plain old scenery, often so functional that it was ordered off the rack, like the costumes and so on. He spent money on those shows so that they became special in themselves. They became novel. There was nothing like that before. You either went to a spectacle in a spectacle theater for the purpose of spectacle, or you went to whatever else there was. He brought the visual excitement and often the surprise of some visual twist or something odd going on. For instance, I think it was Ziegfeld who invented the notion that the dance that followed the song should key into what the song was about. Before him, that never happened. You'd sing a song, and then you'd go off, and the dancers would come out, and they'd dance. Then the book would continue, and then someone else would sing a song, make him or herself scarce, and out would come the dancers. Now, sometimes the performers did the dance themselves, but it had nothing to do with the song. It was just a dance. So Ziegfeld has his first Broadway star, Anna Held, sing, for instance, "A Gown for Each Hour of the Day," because she was very dressy. So this is the heroine's wanting song. In later shows, you get "Waitin' for My Dearie" or even "Some People" in Gypsy. But Anna Held wants to dress better than any other woman on the planet. A gown for each hour of the day. Actually, there were only 6 gowns, so it was a rather short day. And she would dance in and out in these quick change gowns. And the girls were there too, helping her along with the song. But the dance was about fashion. That never happened before. And then there's the dress parade. The girls go like this, and the girls go like that. And the critics say, it's done with strings, it's done with lighting. They're perfectly ordinary girls. No, they weren't. They were special girls because they were all his dates.
You also talk about his life in great detail, very fascinating, his marriages, first to Anna Held and then to Billy Burke, and constant philandering goings on at the New Amsterdam where he had his offices. How did you get all this dish?
Well, actually, a lot of it is dish kind of thing, passed on verbally from generation to generation by people in the theater to people like me who were writing about the theater. But also, luckily, Lincoln Center Library had all the boxes. They had the Ziegfeld boxes, the Anna Held boxes, the Billy Burke boxes. And the odd thing about those boxes is, unlike the rest of the holdings in the library, which are phenomenal, they're not cataloged. It's just box 1, box 2, box 3, box 4. So you never know what you're going to get. So you open up the box thinking, my book, at last, here it is. And it's somebody's bank statements, kind of thing. But another box will have, let's say, the first act of a script to a show that everyone thought was lost for 70 years.
It's so interesting in your book, you say a key to understanding Ziegfeld is where he grew up, in Chicago. He's not a New York boy. Right. What is the influence of Chicago? What is happening in Chicago when he was growing up that turns him into this great showman?
Well, actually, I think the main thing is Chicago at that time was a city of immigrants and the children of immigrants. So obviously, Ziegfeld saw it as it was his experience, but the American experience is you get all these different people from different parts of, I was going to say the world, I suppose different parts of Europe, and that's your life experience. Why not put that on the stage and bring these people? Remember, too, he started just after the main wave of immigrants. The parents were busy assimilating themselves, learning English, and just staying alive. But the kids were the achieving generation, Fanny Brice, Eddie Cantor, and so on. And they're now able to think in artistic terms. They can go on the stage. Their parents are busy paying the rent, kind of thing. And Ziegfeld is familiar with this kind of thing because of his background in Chicago. If you were growing up in Chicago when Ziegfeld was, he was born in 1867, in the 1870s, 1880s, more than half the people you came into daily contact with spoke English, if at all, with a very heavy accent. It really was an immigrant's city, much more so even than New York.
New York was interesting. And then key, though, also is the World's Fair and the Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. Because Ziegfeld grows up with a father who is the head of a big classical music school there. He played the piano himself. He could have had a very sort of, if you will, upper brow kind of classical training and been more genteel. But is it Buffalo Bill's Wild West show that gives him this kind of love of the old showbiz stuff?
It's not clear where it came from. I think he was a very, very, very independent man. No one ever told Ziegfeld what to do. But he would never have fights with men. Anyone who got in his way, he'd just walk around. Just proceed on his own path. Everything he did was according to his lights. The one thing I would say, the one gesture he would make toward what was generally thought of as the correct thing to do was he befriended millionaires because he knew money and power protects you. It's very, very useful for someone like Ziegfeld, especially since in those days producers put on shows with their own money and he was always broke because he was an addicted gambler.
Yes, I want to ask you about that. That gambling was serious. I mean, this was a man who made and lost vast fortunes.
Yes.
And do we have any sense where that came from? That gambling?
No, that we don't know. But Can anyone explain where a gambling addiction
Yeah.
comes from? It's not genetic.
It's always a
not
part of
cultural.
showbiz with these guys, though. I mean, they take big bets on stuff that could just
Well, the
fall
thing
apart.
is, it's not interesting to say, in the Funny Girl movie, he plays some sort of card game with their mothers, and it's like a penny a point or something. That's not what addicted gamblers do. It's only interesting if they can lose everything or win everything.
Yeah.
The man who broke the bank at Monte Carlo is what they want to be. Guess what never happened in the history of the world? No one ever broke the bank at Monte Carlo. The bank always wins in the long run, and he was always broke for that reason, even though he made fortune after fortune after fortune.
It's interesting that we don't know very much. We seem to know a lot about Ziegfeld, and yet he remains a remote, aloof, mysterious human being.
That's the way he wanted it.
Really?
Yes. Again, I don't know whether that was deliberate or it's the poker player in Ziegfeld. When you play poker, you don't explain how you're going to play the 2 of spades and the 3 of spades, and you don't explain what you're going to get from the deck. You just play the hand. That's how he lived his life. He just played the hand. He never explained anything to anybody, which made it a little tricky for this
As a
book.
biographer.
Yes, because he didn't say it, but luckily he was surrounded by people who left autobiographies.
Yes, and you describe him in such articulate detail, interpreting so much of his life, and I'm fascinated, but I didn't really like him. You didn't describe to me what was a likable person.
Well, I mean, he may not have been liked, and a lot of people disliked him for various reasons. For instance, even though he was generous with his performers, even before 1919, the equity strike that finally forced the producers to recognize the union, even before that, he paid more than most people did for his chorus, and especially for his showgirls kind of thing. On the other hand, it was the opposite for the writers. You would have to sit in Ziegfeld's office hour after hour, because he's late with his royalty checks, and there are the usual excuses from Goldie, the loyal secretary. But if you waited long enough, sooner or later he had to come out or jump through the window.
Yeah.
And when he came out, you would be there. And it was that kind of thing. So a lot of people, Richard Rodgers hated him, did 2 shows with him, just hated that Ziegfeldian chaos, because that's how he worked. He didn't work methodically. He wasn't the Hal Prince kind of producer where, let's consider what this is, and the module will turn like that, and Sweeney Todd goes like this. And remember, Angela, to look at Sweeney, it wasn't like that. It's, let's make it. Let's throw everything out there, and we'll start to see what we have. It's like sculpting, with a piece of rough, wet clay.
But
and you look at a number, for instance. I don't like the costumes. Cancel that number. The costumes, the lighting, the music, everything goes.
else.
And put something else in there. There was no chaos like Ziegfeld chaos. I mean, there's no chaos like Broadway chaos, but on a higher level is Ziegfeld's chaos. And Rodgers could not stand working that
on the
way.
other hand, Irving Berlin enjoyed him. I mean, Irving Berlin was very much, give me the check, and what song you want, I'll give you the song.
Some people really liked him a lot. Maybe because he favored them. He and Eddie Cantor and Will Rogers were very, very close, those two. Yes, he was close to Irving Berlin. And maybe it was because they never had any problem about money. The main thing about Ziegfeld was he spent the money, and everybody knew that.
Right.
No matter how difficult he was, Follies chaos, Ziegfeld chaos,
He wasn't
glorifying deals
stealing
in
it.
his office. Not only that, he was spending much too much to make the show fabulous.
Yeah.
In showbiz, there are 2 ways to do it. One way is to be very, very budgeted and to spend just this much so that if you only earn this much, you have succeeded.
Right.
Another way is to spend like this. And your show is so good, it's the Gone with the Wind syndrome. No expense spared. And I will produce the greatest movie Hollywood has yet produced, and everyone will have to see it 2 or 3 times.
And we have to remember that Ziegfeld was doing this year after year. I'm
Yes.
going to produce the greatest Follies you have ever seen.
How do you top the Follies, though, when you've already had the greatest? In 1919, everyone said it's the greatest Follies, and yet there were 10 or 12 more.
One of the many things I like about this book is you really give us a sense of what it was like to experience a Follies. What was a Follies like? What did it look and feel and sound like?
The main thing was, it was more or less all-star, which was very unusual on Broadway. There literally were like 4 or 5 headliners, though no billing. No one ever got star billing in the Follies. They did in his book shows, but not in the review. Also, even the supplementary people were the best people possible. And there was this, what I call surprise and delight. You never really knew what you were going to get, and the thing flew past you like crazy. The idea was, as soon as one sketch ends or one number ends, the next one is already, the curtains are closing, and the 2 guys who are going to sing duets while the stagehands change for the next big number are already coming into place. In those days, that was very unusual, which is why most plays were 1 set. Most musicals even were 1 set per act, or a set, the traveler curtain closes, you do a little something in front that no one cares about, then you can open because the next set is ready. By the time Showboat came along, it's true, you could have pretty much as many sets as you wanted. But you had to write a show with these crummy little worthless scenes in one while the sets were being changed, which makes it difficult when you revive them because you have to get rid of those because those don't really add anything to the show.
Right.
Every now and then, however, Kerner Hammerstein will drop some nugget in there and then you don't know what to do.
Because it's a great
you can't, the story won't make sense without it. So that makes it difficult, but he was cutting edge in his day. Although he was never thought of that way. They would talk about the Ziegfeld touch. Well, that's the way to avoid knowing what it really was. Or they would talk about his exquisite taste. It wasn't taste, he knew talent. Follies was the biggest opening night at a time when opening nights really mattered because all the critics went on opening night. It wasn't scattered the way it is today. Plus, the fancy New York people who wanted to be in on the latest thing or the potential latest thing. Biggest opening night on Broadway, year after year after year after year. How long can it keep going on?
And in the end, it doesn't, and he dies broke.
He dies broke, and no one even knows how he died. I mean, what he died of.
That's right.
My theory is he just exhausted himself.
Fascinating. It's a fascinating book. Ziegfeld, The Man Who Invented Show Business, by Ethan Mordden, out from St. Martin's Press. Thanks a lot for being our guest tonight.
Thank you for asking me.
She was looking for something. Yes. Something called the 39 Steps. If we can find out what the 39 Steps are.
So, let me get this quite clear. Oh, do take a seat, Mr. Hannay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Didn't she tell you what this foreign agent looked like?
No, there wasn't time. There was one thing. Part of his little finger was missing.
Which little finger?
This one, I think.
Are you sure it wasn't this one?
I'm not sure.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Loewe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Allan S. Gordon Foundation, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy STRELSIN Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.